The O.J. Simpson trial is a story everyone thinks they know. It was the trial of the century. We remember the white Ford Bronco, the glove that didn't fit, and the shocking not guilty verdict. The narrative was simple. A famous, beloved athlete was accused of brutally murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and a young man named Ron Goldman. The prosecution built a mountain of evidence against him. The defense, the dream team, picked it apart. O.J. walked free from criminal court, but was later found liable in a civil trial. That was the story. For most people, it ended there. But what if the story we all watched on television wasn't the whole story? What if the Los Angeles Police Department and the District Attorney's Office focused on the famous suspect so intensely that they missed the real killer? What if the killer was someone much closer to the family, someone who was there all along, hiding in plain sight? This is where the story takes a sharp turn into a dark and disturbing theory. A theory that says O.J. Simpson was not the killer. It says his son, Jason Simpson, was. This idea didn't come from nowhere. It's the result of a years-long investigation by a private investigator named William Deere. He wrote a book about it. He claims to have evidence that points directly at Jason, not O.J. To understand this theory, you have to be willing to look at the whole case from a completely different angle. You have to set aside what you think you know about O.J. and look at the evidence, the timeline, and the people involved with fresh eyes. It's a complicated and troubling possibility. It suggests a family secret so terrible that a father might be willing to take the fall for a crime he didn't commit to protect his son. Let's start with Jason Simpson himself. At the time of the murders in June 1994, Jason was 24 years old. He was O.J.'s son from his first marriage to Marguerite Whitley. He was working as a chef at a restaurant in Los Angeles called Mezzaluna. That name is important. Mezzaluna was the same restaurant where Nicole Brown Simpson ate her last meal on the night she was killed. It's also where Ron Goldman worked as a waiter. The official story is that after dinner, Nicole's mother left her glasses at the restaurant. Ron Goldman, being a kind person, offered to drop them off at Nicole's condo on his way home. And that's when he stumbled upon a horrific scene and lost his life. The Jason Simpson theory starts right there, at that restaurant. According to William Deere, the night of the murders was supposed to be a significant one for Jason. He was the head chef for the evening. He had planned a special menu. He had allegedly invited Nicole and the family to come to the restaurant to support him. But they didn't show up. They went to a different restaurant for his sister's dance recital dinner. Then, later, Nicole and her family went to Mezzaluna, but the theory suggests she may not have been there for Jason. The idea is that this rejection, this perceived slight from a stepmother on a big night for him, was the trigger. This is where Jason's personal history becomes the centerpiece of the theory. Deere's investigation uncovered a deeply troubled past. He found medical records and psychiatric reports that painted a picture of a young man struggling with serious mental illness. Jason had been diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder, or IED. This is a condition characterized by sudden, extreme, and often violent episodes of rage that are completely out of proportion to the situation. It's not just getting angry, it's a loss of control. Deere documented a history of violence. Jason had reportedly struggled with drug and alcohol abuse for years, including a documented attempt to take his own life. There were police reports. Deere claims Jason had assaulted a former boss. He had attacked a former girlfriend with a knife, cutting off her hair. These weren't just teenage tantrums. These were documented episodes of dangerous and uncontrollable rage, often involving weapons. He was seeing a psychiatrist and was prescribed Depakote, a drug used to control seizures and stabilize mood in people with conditions like IED. The theory asks a simple question: did he take his medication that day? If not, a perceived rejection from Nicole could have been the spark that lit a very short fuse. The crime scene itself, proponents of this theory argue, looks more like an act of rage than a premeditated murder. The attack on Nicole and Ron was brutal, fast, and overkill. It was frenzied. It was personal. This fits the profile of a rage killing, a hallmark of intermittent explosive disorder. O.J.'s motive, according to the prosecution, was jealousy and control, stemming from a long history of domestic abuse. The Jason theory suggests a different motive, an explosive, uncontrollable fury that erupted in a moment of psychological breakdown. Then there's the physical evidence, or the lack of it, that supporters of the theory point to. The knit cap found at the crime scene was a key piece of evidence. The prosecution said it was O.J.'s. But the theory suggests it was Jason's. Deere claims that hairs found in the cap were not a match for O.J. He also claims that dog hairs found in the cap matched the hair of Jason's dog, not the Simpson family dog. And what about the bloody shoe prints at the scene? They were from a rare and expensive Bruno Magli shoe. The prosecution tried to prove O.J. owned a pair, and eventually, a photo surfaced of him wearing them. but the size of the prints at the scene was a problem. Some analysts have argued they don't perfectly match OJ's shoe size. The theory doesn't necessarily claim they match Jason's, but it uses the discrepancy to cast doubt on the primary suspect. Jason's alibi for the night of the murders is also a major point of contention. What was he doing after he left the restaurant? The official timeline is murky. He clocked out of Mezzaluna around 9:50 p.m. The murders are estimated to have happened around 10:15 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Nicole's condo was a short drive away. According to the theory, Jason's girlfriend at the time said they were at home watching TV, but her story has been described as inconsistent. There is no rock-solid, verified alibi placing Jason Simpson somewhere else at the exact time of the murders. He had the opportunity. Perhaps the most dramatic piece of evidence in Deer's investigation is what he calls Jason's confession. He managed to acquire the contents of a storage locker that Jason had abandoned. Inside, he found journals and notes written by Jason. The writings are dark and disturbing. In one entry, Jason writes about a character he created named Dr. Monster. He describes becoming this person. He writes about killing someone he loved and feeling the knife in his hand. He writes, "I've killed my dog, I've killed my cat, I've killed my fish." In another entry, he writes about a girl he loved who he almost killed, saying, "I grabbed her and I'm holding the knife up to her. I was gonna kill her." To be clear, these are not literal signed confessions to the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They are diary entries of a deeply troubled young man, but the theory presents them as a window into his psyche. They show a preoccupation with rage, violence, and knives. For someone with a documented history of assaulting people with knives, these writings are chilling. Speaking of knives, Jason was an avid knife collector. He was a chef. He used knives professionally every day. He owned a collection of them. The murder weapon was never found, but the wounds on the victims were consistent with a large single-bladed knife. The theory posits that Jason had the means, the skill, and the temperament to inflict the kind of wounds found on the bodies. So, if all this is true, why did O.J. Simpson become the only suspect? And if Jason was the killer, what happened after the murders? This is where the theory gets even more complex. It requires you to believe in a massive, albeit silent, cover-up. The theory goes like this. Jason, in a fit of rage, confronts and kills Nicole. Ron Goldman shows up at the worst possible moment and is also killed. Jason, covered in blood, calls his father in a panic. O.J. rushes to the scene. He is a father seeing a horrific situation involving his son. His first instinct is not to call the police, but to protect his child. In his haste and panic at the scene, O.J. contaminates everything. He gets the victim's blood on him. He perhaps drops the glove from his car. He cuts his hand. He then drives home, dripping blood from his cut hand, creating the blood trail that police would later find leading from his Bronco to his front door. This explains how O.J.'s blood and the victim's blood ended up mixed at the crime scene and in his car. He wasn't there as a killer. He was there for the immediate, chaotic aftermath. This explains some of the strange evidence. For example, why was there so little of O.J.'s blood found inside the Bronco compared to outside? If he had been driving it after a bloody struggle, you'd expect more, but if he only used it to drive home after being at the scene for a few minutes, it might explain the pattern of the blood drops. It also explains O.J.'s bizarre behavior in the days that followed. The slow-speed Bronco chase wasn't the flight of a guilty man, the theory suggests, but the actions of a distraught and suicidal father, torn between protecting his son and the horror of what happened. The note he wrote, which was read by Robert Kardashian, sounded like a suicide note. Maybe it was. Maybe he saw no way out of the nightmare. Under this theory, O.J. made a decision. He had the money, the fame, and the resources to fight the charges. Jason was a fragile, mentally ill young man. A murder trial would destroy him, and he would almost certainly be convicted. O.J., perhaps believing in his own fame and the power of his lawyers, thought he could beat the rap. And so, he never said a word. He let the police and the world believe he was the suspect. He assembled the dream team and fought for his own life, when he was really fighting for his sons. And it's a powerful and tragic narrative, but it is also just a theory, and it has significant problems. It requires you to dismiss an enormous amount of evidence that points directly and forcefully at O.J. Simpson. First and foremost, the source of the theory is a private investigator who wrote a book. It's not a conclusion reached by law enforcement or the courts. William Deer has a financial interest in people believing his theory. That doesn't automatically make it wrong, but it's a critical piece of context. His evidence was gathered years after the fact and has not been subjected to the scrutiny of a criminal trial. The biggest hurdle for the Jason Simpson theory is the overwhelming evidence against his father. Let's not forget what the prosecution had. They had a long and documented history of O.J. abusing Nicole. He had a clear motive of jealousy and obsession. He had pleaded no contest to spousal abuse in 1989. Nicole had called 911 multiple times, fearing for her life. She left diary entries and photos of her bruised face, telling friends that she was afraid OJ would one day kill her. Jason Simpson had no such documented history with Nicole. His violence was directed elsewhere. Then there is the forensic evidence. A trail of blood drops with OJ's DNA was found leading away from the bodies. Nicole's and Ron's blood was found in OJ's Bronco. Ron Goldman's blood was found on OJ's shoe. And most damningly, Nicole's blood was found on a sock in OJ's bedroom at the foot of his bed. How does the cover-up theory explain that? Did OJ walk around the crime scene, get Nicole's blood on his clothes, drive home, go to his bedroom, and drop a bloody sock on the floor, all before getting a call from police? The timeline is incredibly tight and makes the cover-up scenario seem highly improbable. The cut on OJ's hand is also a major problem. He claimed he cut it in a hotel room in Chicago. But prosecutors argued he cut it during the struggle with Ron Goldman, who fought back fiercely. The theory that OJ cut it during a panicked cleanup at the crime scene is possible, but it's an explanation created to fit the theory, not one that arises naturally from the evidence. And why did OJ never once, in all the years since the trial, even hint at this? He maintained his innocence, but he did so by vaguely promising to find the real killers. He never directed that search toward his own son. If he was truly covering for Jason, would he be able to maintain that secret for decades, even after Jason was a grown man? Even as he faced public scorn, a devastating civil judgment that bankrupted him, and later a long prison sentence for an unrelated robbery. It requires an almost superhuman level of paternal devotion and secrecy. It seems more likely that if Jason were the killer, something would have slipped out. A confession, a witness, a piece of evidence that couldn't be explained away. Furthermore, the police and prosecution never considered Jason a suspect. Not for a moment. From the second they saw the crime scene and learned the victim was O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, their focus narrowed entirely on him. They had a clear suspect with a history of domestic violence. They didn't look for anyone else. One could argue this was a failure of the investigation. They developed tunnel vision. But it also means that Jason was never properly investigated. His alibi was never broken. His home was never searched. His DNA was never compared to the evidence at the scene. So, the theory remains just that, a theory built on circumstantial evidence and interpretation. The writings from Jason's journal are disturbing, but they are not a confession. They are the ramblings of a troubled person possibly writing fiction or exploring his darkest thoughts. Many people have dark thoughts and write them down. It doesn't make them murderers. Without context, and without a direct link to the specific crime, using them as proof of guilt is a huge leap. And so, where does that leave us? Was O.J. Simpson's son the real killer? The honest answer is that we will probably never know for sure. The theory is compelling. It offers an explanation for some of the strange aspects of the case. The idea of a mentally ill young man snapping in a fit of rage feels, to some, more plausible than a rich and famous celebrity deciding to throw his entire life away in one night of violence. Jason Simpson had a documented history of the exact kind of explosive rage and violence with knives that this crime required. The theory provides a neat alternative narrative. It paints OJ not as a monster, but as a tragic, flawed father making a terrible choice to protect his son. It's a story of family secrets and misguided loyalty. It makes for a great book and a fascinating documentary. But it remains a fringe theory. Like, to believe it, you have to believe in a perfect, unspoken conspiracy between a father and son. You have to believe O.J. Simpson was willing to stand trial for a double murder he didn't commit. And you have to find a way to explain away the sock in his bedroom, the blood in his car, and the DNA trail leading from the crime scene. That evidence, despite the Dream Team's brilliant work in creating reasonable doubt, is incredibly powerful. It points in one direction, and one direction only toward O.J. Simpson. The Jason Simpson theory exists in the shadow of the main event. It thrives on the public's lingering doubts and the circus-like atmosphere of the original trial. The trial was so messy and the verdict so controversial that it left the door open for other possibilities. People felt that justice wasn't served, so they went looking for a different answer, one that made more sense to them. The theory that Jason did it provides that alternative. In the end, it's a puzzle with pieces that don't quite fit, no matter how you arrange them. If you believe OJ did it, you have to contend with the ill-fitting glove and some of the strange timeline issues. If you believe Jason did it, you have to invent a massive unproven cover-up and ignore a mountain of forensic evidence against his father. The legal system gave its answer not guilty. The civil court gave its answer liable. Public opinion has largely settled on OJ's guilt. The Jason Simpson theory is a haunting counter-narrative, a whisper of what if in one of the most famous crime stories of all time. It's a possibility that can't be entirely disproven, but it has never been close to being proven either. It remains a dark and compelling chapter in a story that, even decades later, refuses to be simple.